are the ones we've been waiting.
We've been waiting.
We are the ones. We are the ones we've been waiting.
We've been waiting.
There's honey in the rock for all God's children. Honey in the rock, honey in the rock. There's honey in the rock,
Honey in the rock
for all
God's children.
Feed every child of God. We are the ones.
We are the ones.
We've been waiting.
We've been waiting.
Good for nothing. That's a funny expression. You've probably heard someone say that something is good for nothing. Hopefully, you haven't been told at some point you're good for nothing. Now, I'm using the expression in a little different way today. I'm talking about doing good for goodness sake. This is for people who don't do good in order to get into heaven or to stay out of hell. We see goodness as its own reward. In other words, we're good for nothing. It's a high ethic. Many people are motivated to do good by fear. Fear of punishment, fear of a stain on our reputation, fear of the wrath of God. But what about those of us who don't think God is like a Santa Claus kind of a figure who's somewhere up in the clouds keeping score about who's been naughty and who's been nice? Those of us who decide to do good anyway. Why? I mean, it's easy to understand why somebody would do good out of fear. Fear is one of the greatest motivators that there is. I mean, it's a good thing if there's something to actually fear. There's a reason we have this instinct. It's to make us move. If there's a lion trying to run after us, we need to have the adrenaline and have all of our systems shut down so that we move out of the way. But the problem is that these days we're being fed a constant diet of fear. Fear of terrorists, fear of illegal immigrants, fear of people who are too religious, fear of people who are not religious enough, fear of Muslims, fear of extremists, fear of the government, fear of those who fear the government. The list goes on and on. And it's not just religion, but autocrats and fascists all know that the best way to control a populace is through fear. Because fear makes people dumb. Fear actually shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of our brains. In other words, when a person is consumed by fear, they stop thinking. Americans are being pitted one against another, often by turning the most minor of disagreements into major conflicts. Think of the things that have blown up as national issues in the news. The labeling of Mr. Potato Head, Dr. Seuss, old Dr. Seuss books, the supposed canceling of Christmas. It's no coincidence that a lot of the same people who attend churches that preach fear are susceptible to politicians who do the same. author and president of the Rutherford Institute, John Whitehead, who I read earlier. He says, a populace that stops thinking for itself is a populace that is easily led, easily manipulated, and easily controlled. Modern America now possesses all of the necessary ingredients, he says, for a fascist state. Now, religions that use fear to motivate people are a key ingredient to this recipe. Teaching our children to be free thinkers, to be good for goodness sake, makes their lives better and also supports democracy and a free society. Now, I'll admit that we can all use some support sometimes to transcend our natural selfish inclinations. In fact, a colleague of mine describes ministry as God's remedial course for people who might not otherwise be inclined to do good. By this, she explained, she means that some of us who go into the ministry might not read scripture or do spiritual practices or even come to church regularly if our livelihood didn't depend on it. In her words, God set it up so that if we want to eat and have a roof over our heads, we need to act morally and continue to grow spiritually. Now, I have to admit that there are times when I'm cut off in traffic or by another shopping cart in the grocery store, when I'm tempted to cuss somebody out or give a finger gesture that means something similar. But then I think to myself, I'm a minister. I probably should not do that. I'm also reminded of the son whose mother wakes him up on Sunday morning and tells him, son, get up, it's time for church. And he responds, I don't want to go to church. And his mother says, it doesn't matter how you feel, you need to get up and go to church. He says, I don't want to go to church. He says, give me 2 good reasons that I should go to church. And his mother says, okay, first, you're 50 years old. And second, you're the minister. Now, living in a minister's fishbowl with many eyes looking upon you does inspire me to be the best person that I can be. But that said, being good is what my heart wants to do. And that's an inner conviction rather than an outward motivation that guides me. Neither fear of hell nor the promise of heaven are what make me do good. It's an inward imperative that causes many of us to care when we don't have to act when it might be controversial, to serve others when we'd rather indulge ourselves. It's been said that the truest test of character is to act when doing so will not do us any personal good. It's about being good for nothing. Now, I have to admit, when we get to the fund drive of the church every year, as we are now, as we're getting ready for 2022, I kind of wish that I had a carrot or a stick that I could hold out to give to people. It's a classic church fundraising tool to tell people that God is going to bless you if you just give 10% of your income to the church. The idea is that if you're generous with your money and use it for godly purposes, then God's going to make sure that you have more of it. It's kind of a test to prove that you use your money well, then God will give you more. It's a pretty compelling sales pitch in a way, but it starts to feel especially manipulative when preachers start saying, well, if you're having health problems or problems in your marriage or with your children or problems at work, it's because you're not doing right by God. Start paying your pledge, your tithe, and reading your Bible, and they say everything is going to be all right. This carrot is a bit sour because it both blames the person for their problems and preys on their worries and their vulnerabilities, preys on their fear. Now, the preacher would argue, but it gives them hope. And we would argue, but it also lines the preacher's pockets. Fear of eternal damnation by a God who is watching over us is another very strong motivator for some people. My favorite story about going to hell is the congregant who asked his Baptist preacher about the logistics of people burning and gnashing their teeth for eternity. The young man inquired, but what about those people who die after they're old and they don't have any teeth? The preacher assured him, if you go to hell, teeth will be provided. But what about those of us who don't spend our time worried about God's wrath and who don't believe in a sadistic God that tortures people endlessly? For us, any heaven or hell that we're going to experience right here in this life. And our acts of kindness and generosity and love help to make this world a better place. When we feed the hungry, when we house the homeless, when we protect the environment, care for the foreigner, and do work to defeat prejudice, we help to make this world a little more heaven-like, a little less hellish. We may not spend time worrying about hell in the next life, but we certainly want to do what we can to help people stay out of hell in this life. The universalist part of our heritage tells us not to focus our religious life on ideas of hell in another world that we cannot see, but to focus our lives on the very real hells in this life that we can see. That's why people at All Souls support this church. We're proud to be part of a community that has a community resource bank that feeds the hungry and those who are living with food insecurity all around us, especially during the pandemic, and a community that feeds each other in times of illness and crisis and death. We want a place to memorialize our dead, to celebrate the lives of the people we love, a place to honor when babies are born, when couples are marrying, or when they're struggling to stay together, or in the aftermath of a divorce. And right now, all these things are happening during a once-in-a-century pandemic. We need each other when we lose a job, when so many people are moving, either moving back with family or moving away, when we receive a diagnosis or someone we love goes on hospice. We've watched mental health struggles exasperated during this time, and thankfully we have each other in this community. People have come out of the closet during the lockdown. It's pretty hard to stay in the closet when you're sheltering together for 2 years. And our church has been here to support each other through it all. As our nation has been having a long overdue racial reckoning, we're right in the middle of it, doing our part, caring deeply, even when it's not popular. Refugees are fleeing for their lives and into our neighborhoods, and we're pulling together to help them. The world it doesn't stop during a pandemic. And the role of free-thinking religious institutions like All Souls are essential. Ministers still need to be trained, like Corey Lovell, our wonderful ministerial intern this year. And we certainly have needed to add a lot of technology and a lot of staff to help us to use that technology. And that's why we give to this community, not out of fear, but out of a genuine hope and a care for our society, for our children, for our elders, for one another. And because supporting community and freedom is just what we do. It's who we are. I'm proud of how we've shown up during this, what they say, hopefully once in a century kind of a pandemic. Just as some of us have asked our parents and grandparents in the past, what did you do during the Depression or during the World War? I have to imagine that our children and grandchildren will be asking, what did we do during the pandemic? And I have to admit that it's a good feeling to realize that I'm part of a church community that's helped each other and helped others. When people were promoting fear and division, we were supporting freedom and inclusion. I hope you'll be part of the pledge drive that we're starting now for 2022 and support All Souls in the coming weeks. If you've given to All Souls in the past, you'll get a letter in the mail asking you to fill out a pledge card. Now remember, we're not asking for money for 2022. We're just asking for what do you commit to give or what do you pledge to give so that we can make a budget that's realistic, because especially in these times when we really don't know what's happening, what's going to happen, it's really important for us to set a realistic budget that we can pay our musicians and our staff and keep the lights on around here. So whatever you can do, we appreciate that. You can go online to give. There's some pledge cards all around the church if you're here today, but you should be getting something in the mail. We just appreciate you letting us know what you can do in 2022. And also know that if you can't because you're in a difficult situation, we're here for you. And that's what the church does. And there's those of us who are doing okay, are fortunate enough to be doing okay. We're going to give a little bit of extra because we know that people are struggling. And so that's just what we do. That's what community is. And in a time like this, it's wonderful to be part of a community. So I want to leave you with this because we are all interconnected. And that's been our theme in the month of October, oneness and the interconnected web of all life. Albert Einstein said, a human being is part of the whole that we call the universe. Nevertheless, we experience ourselves as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of our consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, Einstein said. It restricts us to our own personal desires and affections for just a few persons who are nearest to us. Our task, he said, must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, he said it like this: when I hold a piece of bread, I look at it and sometimes I smile at it. The piece of bread is an ambassador of the cosmos, he says, offering nourishment and support. Looking deeply into this piece of bread, I see the sunshine, the clouds, the great earth. Without the sunshine, no wheat can grow. Without the clouds, there's no rain for the wheat to grow. Without the great earth, nothing can grow. That's why the piece of bread that I hold in my hand is a wonder of life. It is there for all of us, and we are part of all that is. Now, we forget that we're interconnected in this way. It's easy to get caught up in our own stories and our own lives in ways that make us forget how much we need each other and how fortunate we are to have each other. We are not self-sufficient. We did not create ourselves. We depend on parents, on friends, on the universe, and yes, even the government, to provide what we cannot provide for ourselves. We are part of an interconnected web of all life. And life is a symbiotic, bunch of symbiotic relationships, like bees pollinating the flowers while collecting the nectar that they need to make honey. There's a song that we heard earlier that we sing sometimes at All Souls, that there's honey in the rock for all God's children. Feed every child of God. out of this big rock that we call the earth, there is enough honey to feed us all. There is enough love, enough kindness, enough money. And we do our part because we want to, not because we have to, and not because we're scared to, because we want to play our part in this glorious gift of life. So thank you. Thank you for playing your part as part of this wonderful community we call All Souls, helping us to keep it healthy and alive, even in the most difficult time I've ever experienced in the 20 plus years that I've been the senior minister here. So I guess in the end, we'll just have to admit it. We really are good for nothing. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. For 100 years, All Souls in Tulsa has been a beacon of this free faith. We offer our services and programs freely online for all those who are interested. You can help us to do this by making a one-time gift today or a reoccurring pledge. We really appreciate you joining us and being a part of helping us make All Souls in Tulsa what it is. Thank you.
As we share what we have with each other, let us sing out joyfully. May abundance lead to gratitude, then to generosity.
As we share what we have with each other, let us
share what we have with each other. Let us sing out joyfully. May abundance lead to gratitude.
as we share what we have with each other.
As we share what we have with each other, let us sing out joyfully. May abundance lead to gratitude.
As we share what we have